Good evening and welcome. Wherever you are listening from, allow your breathing to slow and your body to settle. This story is meant to unfold gently, not to demand effort, but to invite attention. You do not need to remember every name or detail. Simply listen and let the journey take shape at its own pace. We begin at the beginning of the story of Moses, long before the desert roads, before the signs and wonders, in a world shaped by power, fear, and quiet hope. Long before Moses was born, Egypt was already ancient. Its cities rose from stone and sand, aligned with the steady rhythm of the Nile. Each year the river flooded, renewing the land and reinforcing the belief that order governed the world. Egypt prized stability above all else. Its rulers believed that harmony must be preserved at any cost, and that chaos was the greatest threat to existence. At the center of this belief stood Pharaoh, not only king, but the living symbol of divine order on earth. Within this powerful civilization lived another people, smaller in number but steadily growing. The Israelites had arrived generations earlier during a time of famine, welcomed at first and allowed to settle. Over time, memory faded. What began as hospitality turned into suspicion. Their growing population stirred fear among Egyptian leaders, who began to see them not as neighbors, but as a risk to stability. Fear reshapes perception. The Israelites' strength was no longer seen as potential, but as danger. Policies were introduced quietly at first, framed as practical measures. Labor was assigned, work became heavier, days grew longer. Slowly, the Israelites were reduced to forced labor, building store cities and monuments that would stand as symbols of Egyptian power. Their bodies carried the weight of an empire's fear. Life under bondage followed a harsh rhythm. Each day was measured in bricks and quotas, each night in exhaustion. Yet even as bodies were pressed into service, identity endured. Stories were whispered in the dark, passed from parent to child. They spoke of ancestors, of promises made long ago, of a God not bound to river or throne. These stories offered quiet resistance, preserving hope beneath suffering. As the population continued to grow despite oppression, fear hardened into cruelty. Pharaoh issued a decree intended to break the future itself. Every newborn Hebrew boy was to be cast into the Nile. The order was absolute, designed to erase a people slowly, without open war. Grief moved silently through the community. Mothers hid their children. Fathers stood helpless against a power too great to resist. It was during this time that a child was born to a Levite woman. She hid him for as long as she could, shielding him from sight and sound. But hiding could not last forever. When concealment was no longer possible, she made a decision born not of despair, but of courage. She placed her child into a small basket, sealed it carefully, and set it upon the waters of the Nile. The river that symbolized death under Pharaoh's decree became, for this child, a path toward life. The basket drifted among the reeds, guided by current and chance. Nearby, Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe. She noticed the basket and ordered it brought to her. Inside, she found the child crying. Something within her responded not with fear or obedience, but compassion. She recognized the child as Hebrew. She also knew the law. And yet, she chose mercy. The child was named Moses, meaning drawn out of the water. He was raised within the palace, surrounded by wealth, education, and power. He learned the language of rulers, the traditions of Egyptian religion, the structure of authority. He was given opportunity beyond imagination. Yet belonging is not granted by comfort alone. Beneath the surface of privilege, Moses carried an unspoken division within himself. He lived between worlds. He was neither fully Egyptian nor fully Hebrew. Identity formed slowly, not through instruction, but through observation. He saw the contrast between palace life and the suffering beyond its walls. He watched laborers bend beneath the sun. He heard cries that echoed faintly even into halls of stone. Awareness took root quietly, shaping his sense of self. As Moses grew into adulthood, this awareness sharpened. One day, witnessing an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew laborer, something within him broke. The injustice was no longer distant or abstract. In a moment of anger and impulse, Moses struck the overseer and killed him. The act was sudden, unplanned, and irreversible. For a brief moment, Moses believed the act could remain hidden. But power does not overlook disruption. Word spread. Pharaoh learned of what had happened. Moses, once protected, became a threat. He fled Egypt, leaving behind status, security, and certainty. Palace walls gave way to open land. The life he had known ended in a single decision. The wilderness received him without welcome or rejection. It simply existed. Moses traveled east into Midian, a land defined not by monuments, but by space. There, his life slowed. He defended strangers at a well, an instinctive act revealing the person he was becoming. He was taken in by a priest named Jethro and eventually married his daughter. Moses became a shepherd, a role far removed from the authority of Egypt. Shepherding reshaped him. Days were quiet and repetitive. He learned patience through routine, awareness through silence. The desert offered no distractions, only reflection. Years passed. The man who once moved among rulers now walked behind animals, guided by seasons rather than commands. Ambition faded. Memory softened. Moses settled into a life that asked little of him beyond endurance. Yet beneath this quiet surface, the story continued to gather strength. The suffering of the Israelites did not end. Their cries rose steadily, carried across generations. And though Moses had fled Egypt, Egypt had not released its hold on the people he left behind. The journey was not finished. It was only being prepared. This first part of the journey ends here, not with resolution, but with formation. Moses has been shaped by water, by power, by exile, and by silence. The world he fled waits unchanged, and the call that will draw him back has not yet been spoken. The road ahead will demand more than courage. It will demand patience, humility, and a willingness to return to what was once left behind. Part 2 continues the journey of Moses, moving from exile into calling, from silence into responsibility. The palace life has fallen away, but its influence has not yet loosened its grip. Moses now lives in Midian, far from the structures of power that once shaped him. Yet the questions formed there continue to follow him. Life in Midian unfolded slowly. The land was quieter than Egypt, shaped by open spaces rather than stone walls. Days were marked by sun and shadow, by the movement of flocks, by the steady rhythm of ordinary labor. Moses rose each morning with no command to follow, except the needs of the animals entrusted to him. He learned the paths of the land, the habits of sheep, the subtle signs of weather and season. Nothing about this work was dramatic, yet it required constant attention. Marriage rooted him more firmly in this new life. He became part of Jethro's household, sharing meals, responsibilities, and stories. Jethro was a priest and elder, a man whose authority came not from force, but from experience and respect. From him, Moses observed a different model of leadership. There were no whips, no monuments, no fear-driven commands. Decisions were made through counsel, patience, and listening. This way of life reshaped Moses quietly, without ceremony. Years passed without notable event. Ambition faded. The anger that once flared so quickly softened into reflection. Moses learned endurance not through struggle, but through repetition. The desert did not hurry him. It asked only that he remain present. In this long stillness, Moses became a man accustomed to silence. Yet the suffering of the Israelites did not end. Though Moses was far away, their labor continued, their cries rising quietly beneath the weight of generations. Their hope had thinned, but it had not disappeared. The stories whispered in Egypt still spoke of deliverance, even as years passed without change. The moment of interruption came unexpectedly, during a task no different from countless others. Moses led the flock toward a mountain, a familiar path he had traveled many times before. Nothing in the land suggested that this day would be different. Yet there, among rock and scrub, he noticed something that refused to be ignored. A bush burned, but was not consumed. Fire existed without destruction. The sight did not overwhelm him with spectacle. It unsettled him through contradiction. Moses turned aside, drawn by curiosity rather than expectation. As he approached, the stillness deepened. A voice called his name, not with thunder, but with familiarity. The moment was intimate and unsettling. He was told to remove his sandals, to recognize the ground as sacred, not because of place, but because of presence. The voice spoke of suffering seen and heard. It named the pain of the Israelites, their labor, their weariness. Moses was told that this suffering had not gone unnoticed. Then came the calling that disrupted everything he had built in Midian. He was to return to Egypt. He was to stand before Pharaoh. He was to lead the people out of bondage. Moses resisted immediately. His response was not defiance, but honesty. He named his fear, his inadequacy, his uncertainty. He remembered his failure, the life he had fled, the anger that once destroyed his place in Egypt. He did not see himself as a leader. He saw only weakness. The voice did not deny these limitations. It acknowledged them. The assurance offered was not that Moses would succeed through his own strength, but that he would not go alone. Signs were given, not as spectacle, but as reassurance. Each sign carried meaning, affirming that the task did not rest solely on Moses' ability. Still, Moses hesitated. Responsibility weighed heavily. To accept the calling meant returning to danger, reopening wounds, risking failure again. To refuse meant remaining safe while others suffered. The tension pressed upon him until decision replaced avoidance. When Moses finally accepted, it was not with confidence, but obedience. The calling did not remove fear. It redirected it. Moses prepared to leave Midian, carrying no army, no authority beyond the message he had received. His family joined him. The journey back toward Egypt began slowly, each step retracing ground once fled in haste. Along the way, the weight of what lay ahead became clearer. Moses would confront a ruler invested in unyielding order. He would speak not as an equal, but as a challenge. The message he carried was simple, yet deeply disruptive. It threatened the foundation of power itself. Before reaching Egypt, Moses was reunited with his brother Aaron, who would speak alongside him. Together, they returned to the elders of the Israelites. The people listened cautiously. Hope stirred, fragile and uncertain. Belief did not erase fear, but it softened despair. The idea of deliverance felt distant, yet possible. The return to Egypt was not triumphant. Nothing had changed on the surface. The structures of power remained intact. The labor continued. Yet Moses returned as someone transformed by silence and responsibility. The shepherd stood where the prince once had, carrying not anger, but resolve. Part 2 ends here, with Moses standing at the threshold of confrontation. The calling has been accepted. The return has begun. What lies ahead will test patience, faith, and endurance beyond anything exile required. The quiet years have prepared him, but the cost of obedience is only beginning to reveal itself. Moses entered Egypt again, not as a prince returning to familiar halls, but as a messenger carrying a burden he could not set down. The land looked unchanged. The river still flowed, the cities still rose in stone, and the rhythm of labor still governed daily life. Yet Moses himself had been altered by exile, silence, and calling. He walked now with the weight of responsibility rather than privilege. Together with Aaron, Moses went first to the elders of the Israelites. He spoke to them of the calling he had received, of the assurance that their suffering had been seen and heard. Aaron spoke the words Moses struggled to shape, and signs were shown, not to impress, but to confirm. The people listened with cautious attention. Hope stirred, fragile and restrained. Years of disappointment had taught them to protect themselves from belief. Still, they bowed their heads, allowing the possibility of deliverance to enter their thoughts. The first audience with Pharaoh unfolded without drama. The request was simple, framed not as rebellion, but as obedience to a higher command. Pharaoh's response was immediate and dismissive. He did not recognize the authority Moses spoke of, nor did he see reason to loosen control. To him, order was sacred, and any challenge to it was a threat. Rather than easing the burden, Pharaoh increased it. The labor of the Israelites was made harsher. Straw was withheld, yet quotas remained unchanged. Exhaustion deepened into despair. The people turned on Moses and Aaron, accusing them of making their suffering worse. The one who promised freedom now appeared to bring only greater hardship. Moses felt the weight of this failure sharply. He questioned the calling that had brought him back. He questioned whether obedience had only multiplied pain. The silence that followed this moment was heavy, filled with doubt. Leadership revealed its cost not in triumph, but in responsibility for suffering one cannot immediately relieve. Yet the message did not change. Moses returned again and again to Pharaoh, carrying the same demand. Each refusal hardened resistance. What followed unfolded gradually, not as a single decisive moment, but as a series of confrontations. Each sign challenged not only Pharaoh's authority, but the certainty of the system he upheld. The natural order itself seemed unsettled, disrupting what had once been predictable. With each escalation, Pharaoh's resolve tightened. Control clung to itself, interpreting challenge as danger. Temporary concessions were offered and withdrawn. Promises were made and broken. The pattern repeated, exhausting all involved. The people waited, caught between hope and fear, unsure whether deliverance would arrive or collapse under resistance. Loss touched every household. Grief spread beyond boundaries of identity, revealing that power exercised without mercy wounds indiscriminately. The cost of refusal grew undeniable. At last, release came not through persuasion, but exhaustion. Pharaoh allowed the people to leave, not as an act of generosity, but to restore stability through absence. The departure was hurried and uncertain. Families gathered what they could carry. There was no time for preparation or ceremony. Freedom began not with celebration, but with movement. The people stepped into uncertainty, leaving behind the only life they had known for generations. As they moved away from Egypt, fear followed closely. The familiar, though cruel, still exerted a pull. When pursuit came, panic returned swiftly. The authority they thought they had escaped closed in behind them. Ahead lay only open land and water. At the edge of the sea, fear reached its breaking point. The people cried out, not in faith, but in accusation. Moses stood once more between promise and despair. There was no strategy to offer, no reassurance that could remove danger. The moment demanded stillness rather than action. The path forward appeared where no path had existed. Movement replaced paralysis. The crossing was urgent and chaotic. Water stood as both barrier and passage. Freedom required motion, not certainty. When the people reached the other side, relief arrived quietly, mingled with disbelief. The threat receded. Silence followed. What had seemed impossible now lay behind them. Yet freedom did not settle easily. The wilderness stretched ahead, vast and undefined. The people had left Egypt, but Egypt had not yet left them. Part 3 ends here, with the crossing complete but the journey unfinished. The people are no longer bound by chains, yet they are not yet free in spirit. Moses has led them out of bondage, but must now guide them through uncertainty. The road ahead will shape them in ways escape never could. The crossing of the sea marked an end, but it did not bring immediate peace. On the far shore, the people stood in silence, listening to the wind move across open land. Behind them lay a power they could see no more. Ahead stretched a wilderness with no clear path. Freedom had arrived, but it felt unfamiliar, even fragile. The certainty of bondage had been replaced by the uncertainty of choice, and many did not yet know how to live within it. At first, relief carried them forward. There was a sense of distance gained, of danger left behind. Yet as days passed, relief gave way to need. Hunger surfaced quietly, then loudly. Thirst sharpened tempers. The desert offered little comfort, and memory began to distort the past. Egypt, once a place of suffering, was recalled as predictable, even generous. The mind reached backward for familiarity when the present felt unstable. The people brought their complaints to Moses. They did not frame them as rebellion, but as survival. They asked why they had been led into a place where nothing seemed secure. Moses listened, absorbing their fear. He stood once again between expectation and reality, carrying responsibility for a situation no one had fully understood when leaving Egypt. Provision came not in abundance, but in measure. Each day offered enough for that day alone. The rhythm required trust. Gathering too much led to loss, while restraint led to sufficiency. This daily dependence reshaped habits slowly. The people learned that freedom did not mean endless supply, but faithful provision. Yet learning was uneven. Doubt returned often. Each challenge reopened old fears. Water shortages reignited anger. Delays stirred impatience. Moses responded not with force, but with persistence. He did not silence the people. He guided them forward through repetition, reminding them that survival now depended on patience rather than fear. As time passed, the journey revealed deeper tensions. Freedom had removed external control, but it had not healed internal division. Disputes arose among the people themselves. Questions of fairness and responsibility pressed forward. Moses found himself mediating constantly, listening to grievances that reflected exhaustion more than malice. Leadership weighed heavily. Moses carried not only direction, but emotion. He heard anger, fear, regret, and longing, often within the same voice. He learned that guiding people through uncertainty required endurance rather than certainty. Answers came slowly, often after listening rather than instruction. The wilderness taught through repetition. Each day resembled the one before, yet subtle change took place. Dependence softened pride. Routine shaped patience. The people learned to move together, to rest together, to argue and reconcile. Community formed not through ideal conditions, but through shared struggle. Moses' role continued to evolve. The confidence that had once been shaped by palace life no longer guided him. Instead, he relied on attentiveness. Decisions were weighed carefully. Silence became a tool rather than a void. Leadership was no longer about commanding direction, but maintaining cohesion. As weeks became months, the people began to understand that freedom was not a moment, but a process. Escape had been dramatic. Formation was slow. The wilderness did not hurry them. It revealed their limits, then invited growth within those limits. The path forward remained uncertain, yet something essential had changed. The people no longer moved under threat of punishment. They moved because movement was necessary. Choice replaced compulsion. Responsibility replaced fear. These changes did not arrive fully formed, but they took root gradually. Part 4 ends here, not with resolution, but with deepening understanding. The people are learning how to live without chains, and Moses is learning how to lead without force. The wilderness continues to shape them both, preparing them for a deeper encounter that will give structure to their freedom and meaning to their journey. As the days in the wilderness lengthened, the burden of leadership grew heavier in ways Moses had not anticipated. Freedom had removed the visible instruments of oppression, but it had exposed something more complex within the people themselves. Without an external enemy to resist, internal tensions surfaced more clearly. Fatigue sharpened disagreements. Fear made small problems feel overwhelming. Moses found that guiding a free people required far more patience than leading a frightened one. Each morning brought new disputes. Some concerned practical matters, such as water sources or grazing paths. Others were rooted in deeper anxieties about fairness, status, and belonging. People argued over responsibility and privilege, over who carried the heaviest burden and who benefited the most. Moses listened to each concern carefully, yet the sheer volume of voices threatened to overwhelm him. He began to sense that his strength alone would not be enough to sustain the journey ahead. The people looked to Moses constantly. To them, he remained the one who had confronted Pharaoh and led them through the sea. They expected answers, decisions, and reassurance. Yet Moses understood that he could not resolve every conflict personally without exhausting himself and weakening the community. Leadership, he was learning, was not about solving every problem, but about creating conditions in which problems could be faced together. It was during this period that Jethro returned, observing the life of the camp with a discerning eye. He watched Moses from morning until night, seated among the people, listening, judging, mediating. Jethro recognized the danger immediately. Moses was carrying a weight that no one was meant to bear alone. The people depended entirely on him, and in doing so, they remained passive, waiting rather than participating in their own governance. Jethro spoke plainly, not as a critic, but as one who cared deeply for Moses' well-being. He explained that exhaustion would not only harm Moses, but the people as well. A leader worn thin could not guide wisely. Authority concentrated in one person would eventually fracture under pressure. What the community needed was shared responsibility, a structure that allowed leadership to multiply rather than collapse. Moses listened carefully. Accepting this counsel required humility. It meant acknowledging that being chosen did not mean being sufficient for every task. He understood that strength lay not in control, but in trust. The decision to share authority was not a retreat from leadership, but an expansion of it. Together, they established a system of shared governance. Leaders were chosen from among the people, individuals known for integrity, patience, and discernment. Responsibility was distributed according to capacity. Some handled minor disputes, while more complex matters were brought forward. Moses remained at the center, guiding and instructing, but no longer alone. This change transformed the rhythm of daily life. Justice became more accessible. Decisions were made more quickly and fairly. The people began to participate actively in shaping their community. Freedom took on a new form, not merely the absence of oppression, but the presence of responsibility. The wilderness became not only a place of survival, but a place of learning how to live together. As the community adjusted to this structure, Moses felt the weight on his spirit ease slightly. He found time to reflect, to listen without urgency, to observe how the people grew in confidence. Leadership no longer drained him at every moment. Instead, it became sustainable, rooted in cooperation rather than exhaustion. The journey continued, carrying them toward a mountain that rose distinctly from the surrounding land. Its presence seemed to invite stillness. As they approached, movement slowed. A sense of anticipation settled over the camp. The people sensed that something significant lay ahead, though they could not name it. Preparation became essential. Boundaries were established, not to restrict, but to ready the community for encounter. The people were instructed to pause, to attend, to recognize that what lay before them required attention and respect. The wilderness had taught them endurance. Now it called for reverence. Moses felt the weight of what was coming. He understood that the freedom they had gained required structure if it was to endure. Without shared values and boundaries, the community would fracture under its own uncertainty. What lay ahead was not conquest or expansion, but instruction that would shape identity. As the people gathered at the base of the mountain, waiting, Moses prepared to ascend alone. This separation was not a sign of distance, but of responsibility. Someone had to carry the weight of encounter so that the people could carry its meaning. Moses stepped forward, not with confidence, but with attentiveness, aware that leadership sometimes required standing apart so that others could move together. Part 5 closes here, at the threshold of encounter. The community has learned to share responsibility, to endure uncertainty, and to move together without force. Moses has learned to lead without exhaustion, to trust others with authority, and to prepare a people for something greater than escape. What comes next will give shape to their freedom and test whether what they have learned can endure. When Moses ascended the mountain, the movement of the camp below slowed almost to stillness. The people gathered at a distance, watching as his figure grew smaller against the rising stone. The mountain did not appear threatening, yet it carried a gravity that invited silence. For the people, this ascent marked a pause in the journey, a moment suspended between what had already been endured and what had not yet been revealed. For Moses, it marked a burden that could not be shared. The climb unfolded slowly. With each step upward, the sounds of the camp faded. Voices, animals, and daily motion dissolved into wind and quiet. Moses had crossed deserts and climbed hills before, but this ascent felt different. He was not moving to escape danger or to guide others forward. He was moving to receive something that would shape the life of an entire people. The wilderness had taught him endurance and patience. Now, It demanded attentiveness. At the summit, stillness deepened. There was no spectacle meant to impress, no display designed to overwhelm. What unfolded was instruction, weighty and deliberate. Moses encountered not power expressed through force, but presence expressed through clarity. What was given to him was not a weapon, not a claim to territory, and not a strategy for dominance. It was a framework for living, shaped to sustain freedom rather than conquer enemies. The law addressed the fragile nature of a free people. It spoke to relationships, to boundaries, to responsibility, and to restraint. It addressed how power should be limited, how rest should be honored, and how justice should be practiced. These instructions did not promise ease, but they offered guidance for living together without returning to bondage. Moses understood that freedom without structure would fracture under fear and desire. Time on the mountain stretched in unfamiliar ways. Days passed, measured not by hunger or movement, but by waiting. Moses remained apart, absorbing instruction and carrying the weight of what he would eventually bring back to the people. Each moment deepened his awareness of responsibility. Below, waiting took on a different shape. Without visible leadership, uncertainty grew. The people began to wonder whether Moses would return at all. The mountain that had promised guidance now appeared distant and unresponsive. Silence, once restful, became unsettling. Fear resurfaced quietly, then more urgently. Without direction, memory reached backward for comfort. The past, though painful, felt familiar. The present felt exposed and unstable. Anxiety shaped action. The people sought something tangible to anchor their fear, something they could see and control. In their uncertainty, they turned to familiar forms, recreating symbols that offered the illusion of stability. This choice was not driven by rebellion alone, but by impatience and fear. Trust had not yet learned how to endure absence. When Moses descended, the contrast between what he carried and what he encountered was immediate and jarring. The weight of instruction met confusion born of fear. His anger rose not as uncontrolled rage, but as grief over how quickly trust had unraveled. He saw how easily freedom could be reshaped into something comforting and false. The response that followed was painful. Consequences unfolded not as vengeance, but as recognition of cost. What had been broken required confrontation before it could be restored. The people were forced to reckon with how fear had guided their actions. The moment revealed that freedom demanded vigilance, not complacency. Restoration did not come quickly. Trust had to be rebuilt deliberately. Instruction resumed, and commitment was reaffirmed. The law was not withdrawn in response to failure. It was offered again, not as punishment, but as covenant. Relationship required responsibility. Freedom demanded memory. The wilderness resumed its role as teacher. Failure did not end the journey. Instead, it became part of it. The people moved forward carrying both the weight of error and the possibility of mercy. Each step reinforced lessons that could not be learned in comfort. Trust was no longer an abstract idea. It became a practice shaped through repetition. Moses carried these lessons deeply. Leadership revealed itself again, not as control, but as patience. He could not prevent every failure, nor could he force obedience. He could only guide the people back toward attention and responsibility. The law he carried was not a guarantee of faithfulness, but a guide for return when faithfulness faltered. As days passed, the people began to understand freedom differently. It was not a possession secured once and forgotten. It was a condition requiring constant care. Memory became essential. Forgetting led backward. Remembering allowed movement forward. The mountain remained behind them, but its presence continued to shape their choices. The mountain became a reference point rather than a destination. It stood as a reminder that guidance existed beyond fear, if the people were willing to wait and listen. The wilderness, once feared as empty, revealed itself as a place of instruction that did not hurry its students. By the time the journey resumed in full, something essential had changed. The people were not perfected, but they were more aware. They had seen how absence could test trust and how fear could distort purpose. They had learned that silence did not mean abandonment. Moses, too, had been transformed. He carried not only instruction, but humility shaped by confrontation and return. Part 6 closes here, with the people moving forward once more. The law has been given, broken, and reaffirmed. Freedom has been tested by waiting and fear. What lies ahead will not be easier, but it will be deeper. The long years of wandering remain, and within them, the slow work of becoming a people capable of carrying what they have been given. As the camp reorganized and movement resumed, the people carried the memory of the mountain with them in quiet ways. Conversations softened. Disputes still arose, but they were now shaped by awareness of consequence. The presence of instruction did not eliminate conflict, yet it provided a shared language for addressing it. The people were learning that freedom required accountability, not imposed from above, but embraced from within. Moses watched this change carefully. He understood that transformation rarely arrived all at once. It unfolded through habit, reflection, and repeated choice. The wilderness continued to test them, revealing old fears alongside new understanding. Each challenge became an opportunity to remember what had been learned, rather than to retreat into what was familiar. The law Moses carried did not stand apart from daily life. It entered into decisions about rest, work, justice, and care for the vulnerable. It reminded the people that power, even among themselves, required restraint. It called them to consider not only survival, but dignity. These ideas settled slowly, shaping identity through practice rather than proclamation. Moses felt the weight of years beginning to press upon him. The role he carried would not end quickly. The journey ahead remained long, and the people were still learning how to walk it together. Yet something had shifted. The foundation had been laid. Freedom now had shape, memory, and direction. The mountain faded into the distance, but its influence remained. The people moved forward not as those who had simply escaped oppression, but as those beginning to understand responsibility. The wilderness would continue to refine them, but the encounter they had passed through would guide their steps when uncertainty returned. The years that followed unfolded without dramatic markers. There was no single moment that defined them, no clear boundary between one season and the next. The wilderness became a long passage of time, measured by movement, repetition, and gradual change. What had once felt temporary now revealed itself as formative. The people were no longer simply traveling through the desert. The desert was shaping them. Freedom settled into routine. Days began with gathering, preparation, and movement. Nights ended beneath the same open sky, where stars offered constancy even when circumstances did not. The extraordinary events that once defined the journey faded into memory, replaced by the ordinary labor of living together. In this long stretch, the people learned that endurance mattered as much as deliverance. Old fears resurfaced in quieter forms. Hunger was no longer constant, but it returned often enough to remind the people of their vulnerability. Water was found, lost, and found again. Each challenge tested patience rather than courage. The temptation to look backward did not disappear. Memory continued to soften the edges of the past, reshaping hardship into familiarity. Moses heard these longings and understood them. Freedom, he knew, did not erase fear. It required learning how to live with it. Leadership during these years demanded attentiveness more than action. Moses no longer stood before Pharaoh or crossed seas. Instead, he listened, judged, advised, and waited. Disputes continued, though they rarely threatened collapse. The structures established earlier allowed the community to function without constant crisis. Shared leadership distributed responsibility and prevented exhaustion. The people were learning how to govern themselves, imperfectly but intentionally. Moses aged within this rhythm. The urgency of earlier years softened into reflection. His authority no longer rested on decisive moments, but on accumulated trust. He spoke less often, but with greater weight. His presence carried reassurance, not because he had all the answers, but because he had walked the road with them. The wilderness continued to teach through repetition. Progress was slow and often invisible. Yet change was occurring beneath the surface. A generation that had known only bondage gradually gave way to one shaped by movement and instruction. Children grew up without memory of Egypt's chains. Their understanding of identity was formed not by oppression, but by shared journey. This shift mattered deeply. Moses recognized that the future would belong not to those who remembered slavery most vividly, but to those who had learned responsibility in freedom. The long years were necessary not as punishment, but as preparation. A people shaped too quickly by success would fracture under its weight. Moments of failure still occurred. Impatience led to conflict. Fear led to poor decisions. Yet recovery followed more readily than before. The people had learned how to return after stumbling. Memory of instruction guided correction. The law given earlier did not disappear into abstraction. It lived within daily decisions, shaping how disputes were resolved and how the vulnerable were treated. Moses understood that leadership now meant preservation rather than momentum. He guarded memory carefully, reminding the people of where they had come from and what they had learned. Forgetting, he warned, would undo them more quickly than any external enemy. Comfort carried its own dangers. As years passed, Moses began to sense the limits of his own role. Strength gave way to endurance, endurance to reflection. He continued to guide, but he also prepared the people for a future that would not include him. Leadership, he knew, was not possession. It was stewardship. The journey drew them closer to the boundary of the land long promised. Anticipation grew, tempered by experience. The people no longer imagined arrival as instant relief. They understood that every new stage would bring new responsibility. Freedom had taught them this lesson well. Moses spoke often during this time, not to command, but to remind. He recounted the journey, naming both triumph and failure. He emphasized justice, humility, and care for one another. He urged restraint in power and generosity in abundance. His words carried the weight of lived experience rather than idealism. The wilderness, once feared as empty, revealed its purpose fully in these years. It had stripped away illusion and replaced it with patience. It had taught the people how to move together without force, how to endure uncertainty without surrendering identity. The journey had shaped them into something new. Part 7 closes here, within the long middle of the story rather than its end. The people are no longer newly freed, yet not yet arrived. Moses stands as a steady presence shaped by time, preparing others to continue what he began. The road ahead remains, but it is no longer unfamiliar. The people carry memory, structure, and understanding, forged slowly through years of shared movement and quiet endurance. As the camp moved from place to place, patterns emerged that bound the people together. Shared meals, shared rest, and shared responsibility created rhythms that replaced the rigid control once imposed by masters. These rhythms did not eliminate disagreement, but they offered stability in its midst. The people learned how to argue without breaking apart, how to reconcile without erasing difference. Moses observed these developments with quiet attention. He understood that true transformation often arrived without announcement. It did not appear as spectacle or victory, but as consistency. The people were learning to trust one another, not because fear compelled them, but because experience had taught them the value of cooperation. The passing of time brought grief as well. Those who had begun the journey did not all live to see its later stages. Loss became part of the shared story. Funerals marked the road as clearly as campsites. These moments reminded the people of their fragility and deepened their sense of responsibility toward one another. Community grew not only through survival, but through mourning. Moses felt these losses keenly. He carried the memory of those who would not continue. Each absence reinforced the weight of leadership. He was not guiding an abstract group, but individuals whose lives were bound to the journey. This awareness tempered his decisions and deepened his compassion. As new generations took shape, Moses adjusted his guidance. He spoke differently to those who had never known slavery. He taught them not only laws, but stories, ensuring that memory would survive beyond experience. History became instruction. The past was preserved not to bind the future, but to inform it. The wilderness years, long and unremarkable on the surface, became the foundation of identity. They taught the people that freedom was not proven through conquest, but through endurance. Stability emerged not from land possessed, but from values practiced consistently. Moses sensed that his role was nearing completion. He did not withdraw abruptly. Instead, he shifted gradually, allowing others to step forward. Leadership widened. Responsibility spread. The people were learning how to continue without constant dependence on a single voice. The journey pressed on, carrying both anticipation and restraint. The people stood closer than ever to what had been promised, yet they no longer rushed forward blindly. Experience had taught them caution. The long road behind them had shaped their expectations. Part 7 ends with preparation rather than arrival. The people are becoming capable of carrying their future. Moses remains present, but no longer central in every moment. The wilderness has done its work, and time itself has become the teacher that prepared them for what lies ahead. As the journey drew toward its final stretch, the wilderness no longer felt endless. The land ahead could be sensed even before it was seen, carried in the way the people spoke and the way they listened. Years of wandering had reshaped their expectations. They no longer imagined arrival as an escape from difficulty, but as a continuation of responsibility in a different form. Freedom, they had learned, did not end struggle. It changed its shape. Moses felt this shift deeply. Age had settled into his body, not as weakness, but as weight. Each step carried memory. Each decision was shaped by reflection rather than urgency. He no longer led from the front in every moment. Instead, he observed, guided, and prepared others to carry what he would soon release. The people gathered more often now to listen. Moses spoke not to command movement, but to preserve memory. He reminded them of where they had begun, of the fear that once defined them, and of the patience that had slowly replaced it. He spoke of Egypt not as a place of power, but as a lesson. He spoke of the wilderness not as punishment, but as formation. These speeches were not hurried. Moses took time to explain, to repeat not words, but meaning. He emphasized justice, warning that power, once gained, must be restrained. He urged care for the vulnerable, reminding the people that they had once been vulnerable themselves. He spoke of humility, knowing how easily success could harden into arrogance. The boundary of the Promised Land stood near, yet Moses understood that he would not cross into it. This knowledge did not arrive suddenly. It had settled slowly, shaped by years of responsibility and loss. His role had never been possession. It had been preparation. Accepting this truth required humility, equal to any he had learned before. Moses' awareness of his approaching end did not lead him to withdraw. Instead, it sharpened his focus. He spoke with clarity born of lived experience. He warned the people not to forget the lessons of the wilderness once stability returned. Comfort, he knew, carried its own dangers. Forgetting could undo what hardship had built. Leadership began to shift more visibly. Others stepped forward, not as rivals, but as continuations. Moses encouraged this transition. Authority, he understood, was not diminished by sharing. It was preserved. The people needed to learn how to listen to new voices while holding on to shared values. As the days passed, Moses reflected often on the long road behind him. His life had been shaped by water, by power, by exile, by silence, and by responsibility. He had been a child hidden in fear, a prince divided by identity, a shepherd shaped by patience, and a leader formed by endurance. Each stage had prepared him for the next, though he had not known it at the time. The people, too, had been shaped by stages. They were no longer the frightened laborers who had left Egypt. They were not yet settled inhabitants of a land. They stood between, carrying memory and instruction forward together. Moses recognized that this in-between space had been essential. It had given them time to become more than survivors. Near the end of his journey, Moses climbed once more, not to receive instruction, but to reflect. From this vantage, he could see the land that lay ahead, though he would not enter it. The sight did not bring bitterness. It brought understanding. The promise had never been about possession alone. It had been about becoming a people capable of responsibility. Moses spoke his final words with calm resolve. He blessed the people, not as subjects, but as companions who had walked the long road with him. He reminded them that leadership was not found in domination, but in service. He urged them to remember that freedom required constant care. As Moses' life drew to a close, there was no spectacle. The end came quietly, fitting the path that had shaped him. He was buried away from monuments and cities, his resting place unmarked. The absence of a grave reflected the nature of his leadership. What mattered was not where he lay, but what he had set in motion. The people mourned, not only the loss of a leader, but the passing of an era. Yet they did not remain frozen in grief. The journey continued. Responsibility passed forward. Memory endured. The wilderness years did not vanish behind them. They remained part of the story carried into the future. The story of Moses ends not with conquest, but with continuity. His life was not measured by land claimed or power held, but by transformation guided over time. He did not bring the people to an end. He brought them to a beginning they were prepared to sustain. And so the journey rests here, at the edge of fulfillment rather than its center. The long road behind has shaped the path ahead. Moses' story reminds us that purpose is often fulfilled not in arrival, but in faithful movement through uncertainty, guided by patience, memory, and hope. The people step forward carrying what they have learned, and the story continues beyond the one who first answered the call. The legacy Moses left behind did not depend on his presence. It lived in shared practices, remembered stories, and habits formed through long discipline. The people had learned how to argue without fracture, how to recover from failure, and how to carry responsibility together. These quiet skills would sustain them more reliably than any single act of deliverance. In stepping forward without Moses, the people did not abandon his guidance. They carried it internally, shaped into judgment and restraint. The wilderness had taught them how to endure waiting, how to live with limits, and how to listen before acting. These lessons would remain essential long after the desert lay behind them. Thus, the story closes gently, not with finality, but with continuation. Moses' journey ends, but the people's journey moves on, shaped by the slow wisdom of time and the steady work of memory. Time moved forward in small, steady ways after Moses' passing. Leadership did not collapse, nor did certainty suddenly appear. Instead, the people continued to rely on the structures and habits formed during the long years of wandering. Decisions were made with memory in mind. Conflicts were addressed through shared responsibility rather than force. The absence of Moses tested what had been learned more than his presence ever could. The people discovered that remembrance was an active practice. Stories were told and retold, not as distant history, but as instruction for daily life. Children learned not only the names of places and events, but the values that had carried the community through uncertainty. Memory became a bridge between generations, ensuring that experience would not be lost to comfort or success. The land ahead would bring new challenges. Stability would introduce temptations unfamiliar to those shaped by wandering. Yet the wilderness had prepared the people to recognize danger, even in abundance. They had learned that ease could weaken attention, and that freedom required vigilance no matter the circumstance. Moses' absence made room for collective leadership. No single voice replaced his. Instead, guidance emerged through cooperation and counsel. This shift reflected the deepest lesson of the journey, that a people shaped together could endure beyond any one individual. Thus, the story of Moses closes with continuity rather than conclusion. His life demonstrated that leadership rooted in patience, humility, and memory could transform a people without conquering a land. The long road behind them had shaped their future more profoundly than any moment of arrival. The people stepped forward carrying not only law and promise, but understanding earned through time. The wilderness remained part of them, not as hardship remembered, but as wisdom lived. And in that quiet endurance, the journey that Moses began found its lasting meaning.